Hi, and welcome to the Build and Exit podcast. I'm Julie Wilkinson, and I'm your host. I started the podcast off the back of the work I do in my company, Wilkinson Accounting Solutions, because I saw there was a big gap in the market and across the world, really, in acquisitions and SMEs, knowing their valuations and trying to improve generational wealth across business owners. So I'm really excited today to have some close friends of mine, Clive, Margetts, and Ollie Luke. Hi, guys.
Hi, Julie.
Hello.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
That's all right. Thanks for coming on. So Clive and Ollie are co-founders of Acquisition Masters, who's actually a sponsor of the podcast. I'm really aligned to it because of their mission, which we'll talk into it on the show. A bit of background, though, about why sort of I feel it's a good synergy to what I do. So Ollie is the founder of Orange and Grey Marketing, a marketing agency which has had since 2017. Has teamed up with Clive and has been in the acquisition space for a few years and obviously part co-founder of Acquisition Masters. Clive is also co-founder of Acquisition Masters with Ollie, has done about 3 to 4 acquisitions, which I've heard some of the stories it's spanning back years. We won't say how many, Clive. And he does a lot. And actually, one of the things we're going to talk about today is because Clive does a lot in consulting for equity, which we can dive into, which is never really talked about on the show. He's done around 8 to 10. And I think it's a really interesting topic that not many people talk about. So I just want to thank you both for coming on and hand over to you to say a bit about why you wanted to come on the podcast. So Clive, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Yeah, so I mean, background, 26, 27 years now, obviously business owner. Started my own first business about then. Since then, I've taken 3 businesses from startup to profit to exit. And I've also got involved in another one, which is obviously with Ollie, you alluded to, which is our digital marketing company that we co-found with another. And ultimately, we've also done multiple acquisitions in various guises. As you mentioned, the first one was actually started off as an equity purchase, but ended up an assets purchase in the end, and that was a turnaround. And since then, that was back in 2013. It's been quite a journey since then.
And Ollie?
Yeah, my journey's been a little interesting, especially from an acquisitions perspective. I suppose my first step into business was as a 15-year-old. I started a very questionable, highly illegal, definitely morally illegal online business. Quickly realized that just putting it on Google doesn't mean you're going to make sales, and had to learn marketing. And that become a little bit of a mission and a binge of getting my hands on everything marketing related, which grew into a number of startup marketing businesses, marketing consultancy companies, a direct mail company here in the UK that I exited at the end of 2019, and then a big marketing agency that has been the big focus of my time and energy over the past 7 to 8 years as we've grown a marketing agency in a niche in the US to a nice sized business with a good management team in place, which means that over the past couple of years, as I look forward on focusing on decades of my career rather than years, it's very clear right now the vast opportunity from acquisitions, given the huge transition of boomers, which has very much led to me being highly interested in this, and Clive and I partnering on a number of deals and naturally developing Acquisition Masters, given the opportunity that we're seeing.
Yeah, and just whilst we're on that, just give a background about Acquisition Masters. And obviously, I know, because I'm quite close to this, your goal of 1 billion acquisitions over the next 10 years. It'd be interesting, I think, to give a bit of background about the baby boomers and why you think there's a big market for that.
Yeah, the big thing that's really standing out from our perspective right now is there's a big generational change, right? We had the silent generation. There was around 12 million of them in the UK. Many of them were traditional jobs, many tendencies for being frugal, for respect for authority. And we're seeing that generation naturally decline. But the generation afterwards, which was a dramatically different generation, was the boomers. There was around 13 million born in the UK, grew up during huge prosperity. The US dollar became the global currency reserve in 1944. The GDP of the UK was 5% consecutively year on year for many years. And 1 in 5 people in that boomer 1946 to 64 age range is technically a millionaire, mainly because they bought a house for 20 grand and it's now worth 2 million and all the cliches. But the big interesting thing about that generation is when you run the numbers, 612,000 businesses in the UK are operated by boomers. Now we consider the age range where they're at right now, where we're getting thousands turning 70 every single week. And over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be close to 13 million boomers who are 70 plus. We've got a big issue on our hands because they need to transition those businesses. And naturally, what are their options right now? They can go to the private market, they can go to PA. There's a bunch of options to them. But really, for the size of business the majority are in, the options aren't plentiful, which means that private buyers are predominantly going to be the buyers. And with so many sellers and not a lot of buyers, it's creating a very funky situation where we're seeing a lot of them being pushed into very difficult situations. Stats are coming out that are sharing how members' voluntary liquidation is going through the roof, how there's more business deaths than Berks. It's a very, very interesting time where there's great businesses that have solid teams, solid client base, develop great solid products and services that are unfortunately going to be in a difficult situation where they're going to struggle to exit. So I feel like a responsibility to naturally help with the legacy businesses that have been built, which was one of the big founding reasons of seeing exactly what was going on right now, realizing that we can naturally do the work in order to buy some of these businesses ourselves to help them continue and naturally be the beneficiaries of that. But 612,000 of these, we're probably going to need more people who are entrepreneurs, business owners, who are a safe pair of hands to be pretty key to acquire some of these businesses and continue the very important legacy of a real foundational UK business.
Yeah, and then I know that's obviously why Acquisition Masters was formed. I don't know if you just want to give a background, Clive, about sort of how that's supporting your mission.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think the first thing to say about the M&A space right now is because of the opportunities that exist, and not a lot of people are talking about the space, and they talk about it with a view to the opportunities that exist there, and it's in the UK, the States, wherever you're talking or you're located in. There's opportunities there, but the important thing here is who should buy these legacy businesses. We've talked about the fact that there is an awful big opportunity here, but the reality is that if you've never run a business in your life before, it's a daunting prospect to take over a business and then find yourself that you're the person who's got to drive the strategy. So Acquisition Masters is slightly different than, actually quite markedly different than many, in that we position ourselves for business owners. So business owners with sustainable businesses looking to acquire in the UK, and we position ourselves very much as it stands at the moment in the UK. We're very UK centric. Doesn't mean that all our members are from the UK. We have some that have within other parts of the world. Certainly represented in Europe quite to a decent level, and we are very much, it's aligned to Ollie's and my own belief that when we're very fortunate, business has been very good to us. We've worked very hard at it, like everybody does, but ultimately we're in a fortunate position. And many people, what became very clear to both Ollie and myself is how little people knew really about the opportunity that exists, and also the lack of understanding about how acquisition can lead to a impressive growth strategy. And then on top of that, the lack of understanding around business valuations. So people, work very hard within their businesses for many, many years, looking to grow those businesses, but don't really understand things like transfer of value. What does that mean? How does a multiple work? Why does it work? What impacts these things? And just the fundamental basis of the numbers. And as you'll know yourself, Julie, very few business owners actually really understand their own numbers.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I think it's a real buyer's market. My view or take on it is sellers go to market with very little knowledge, probably ridiculous views of what they're valued, and buyers swoop in. Where there's risk, there's opportunity, and I do think buyers tend to get the better end of the deals, or they don't go through because, like I said, I can't provide. And what I find interesting, I do a lot of work with businesses where they don't necessarily say I want to sell because perhaps they enjoy their business, but they do want to step away and they want to maybe build a generational business or part exit or whatever, bring an investor in or whatever. But they're turning down millions of projects because their current business model isn't capable for that next stage of growth, which is really interesting because a lot of people talk about the multiples and that it's worth what it is now. And that is true on paper. I suppose the average valuation is the last 3 years. The multiple there is what someone's willing to pay. But if you have an opportunity that you could potentially triple even, or even quadruple your business through strategies, now whether you want to take that to that level or you want to get out and somebody else take it there, how much more would it actually be worth if you can prove to somebody, I have an operational capability to scale this business? And I think that is the biggest problem that I see, the bottlenecks of the sellers. Buyers, it's different because they're either an educated buyer or they're not, and you can teach that. But from a seller's perspective, that's a lot more work because these businesses are operationally not efficient to scale to a certain level. And that's when I think they're going to get the real value.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you say there because you're quite right. But the reality is that with a lot of what we talk about, and it's quite interesting what you say about having the know-how about their own business. We got to understand why people start a business in the first place. And we're looking at these baby boomers, and listen, it doesn't just apply to baby boomers, but the reality is we're well aware of the fact that there needs to be a massive transition of business activity over the course of the next decade. Otherwise, in some cases, well, there will be undoubtedly businesses that are potentially hugely successful and actually very worthwhile to us as a society are going to go by the wayside and be shut down because they have to transition. Most people that operate businesses they talk about an exit strategy. They have a vague idea of exit strategy, but they don't really have anything set up. And even those, and I'm talking about people that actually understand that they need to have an exit strategy. So what we find with an awful lot of the sellers, they are at a disadvantage because quite often they only start selling when they need to sell. So because ultimately something is maybe triggered in their life. And I'll give you an example of something that happens quite commonly now for those that we're talking about that are looking to exit and retire. Maybe could be down to ill health. So it could be down to ill health of the individual concerned, or it could be down to a situation whereby it's ill health of the spouse or whatever. So I was out of business literally just last week, and ultimately that one of the projects we're involved in is looking to acquire, and that had 2 years ago that had 2 owners. Today it's got 1 owner, and the reason it's only got 1 owner is because one of them became very ill very, very quickly, and they had to exit like now. They had no choice. Luckily, there was the other owner was there. They actually acquired them out, bought them out. But then it's got them thinking about, well, I actually need to now consider my own exit strategy. And the problem, if you like, is in that case, they've done what many people will naturally do and naturally think is the way to do it, which is to go to one of the large business brokers, maybe to go and do that. And fundamentally, in our experience, many of the people within the business brokering community, they also haven't got an idea on valuation. So they have so they will play to, they'll pay you'll pay a fee up front, and they'll almost be a listing agent really for you. And if you sell, well, it's more luck than judgment because very few of those actually do sell. But there is going back to the opportunity that exists there for the right businesses. If you can, we talk about this quite a lot, as you know, Julie, in Acquisition Masters, in terms of arbitrage, that is building one business onto another, acquiring another business. So an example of that might be, we'll take an engineering manufacturing business, and we'll say that it's a 2 million business, 500,000 EBITDA, just for easy maths, and we'll just assume for a second that they then acquire a similar size business with a similar size for ease of reference, EBITDA business. Now, that business that they had originally might have been worth a 2 multiple. We talked about multiples, or we touched on it a little bit a while ago. Now you've got a business that is now 1 million EBITDA. If you did, there's a number of things that would come out of this. You'd probably be doing more than 1 million, because what you'd have economies of scale. There might be, cross-selling opportunities and things of that nature. But let's assume for a second there's none of that, and they're just 2 businesses that independently run, but it's now a bigger group. You've suddenly increased your multiple by at least 1, possibly 2. And at that point there, and if you did that multiple times, you could suddenly take a business that really was not going to achieve your end, number, if we can put it that way, because most people have a number in mind that's they need in order to live life comfortably, and that can be massive. It can be a game changer. And if you're sort of somebody who's a business owner now, sitting there in your 50s, early 50s, mid 50s, certainly if you're younger, and you've got a situation where you're thinking, I'm looking to exit maybe in about another 5 years or so, you've got an opportunity now that exists that could get you to the number that you probably won't achieve otherwise. So there's a great opportunity there. But you're right in what you say about the sellers. They are somewhat prejudiced at the moment, especially if they need to exit right here, right now.
So the consult for equity that you talk about, I mean, what's your view, Ollie, in terms of it? I'm presuming if you can explain a bit about the consult for equity, but that's a way, I suppose, you can help people get more towards these goals of exit. Because what support do you give to people on the consult for equity journey if people are looking at it as either accepting it in their business or potentially even doing it? What do you do in consult for equity?
Yeah, and there's a lot of nuance. First of all, I'll share how some of them come around and how they work. And there was an example not too long ago where we were initially looking to buy a business. The seller had a very high expectation of what the number should be. Our expectation was a little more realistic of what we would offer for it. And what quickly came out in the conversation when we were sharing what the business needs to do to get to that valuation is they realize, well, we can't do that on our own. And by just offering the value and helping them understand where the gaps are in the business, what's resulted in now is us taking an equity a position in that business to help it get to where it needs to be. So consulting for equity, we've done a number of deals now, and they didn't all come around in terms of like we're going looking for businesses and approaching them to say, hey, give us some equity and we'll consult you. They came around for a number of reasons. That could be business owners that just know that we're good at what we do, reach out to say, hey, we need a bit of help with this. Can you give us some guidance? And then the conversation starts. Or it is situations where you're looking to acquire, and you build a relationship up with the seller and you help them understand that actually they're probably not where they need to be right now, but you can offer them support, guidance and expertise to get there. But I'd say a big thing that at least I've learned and observed with consulting for equity is it really helps when you've got good credibility behind you. If in the nicest way, if you were a nobody and a stranger and you approach somebody, the gap for them to go, let me give you some equity in my business because I trust your skill set, is a lot wider. When you've got some credibility and expertise behind you and a solid track record, then dare I say, it's speed is sexy, right? In terms of somebody who can come along who has done it. We're all naturally more attracted towards working with somebody like that to shortcut our journey.
Yeah, I think even going on, and an example of this is you need to understand where your value really lies. And I'm going to say yourself, Julie, because it's appropriate to do so. But in terms of yourself, you are absolutely so hot on the numbers. You've very kindly even presented at our events in the past in terms of when you first attended, you gave an incredible workshop actually around the numbers. And it was just that understanding of really where is your sweet spot, what do you bring to that is very important to the opportunity, is very, very crucial. Now, there are those that, deal originate, as we call it, for consulting for equities in the same way you might do the same for an acquisition strategy. But the reality is that, as Ollie says quite rightly, a lot of the ones that we're involved with right now, for example, are ones that really we weren't looking for. They've just sort of we found out we've been invited to, or wouldn't there be a great way if we could actually work with you? So, an example, I'll give you some examples of how these things have come about if you'd like to. So, I mean, one we've got now, and Ollie, you don't even know this because it's actually just come up on my notifications on WhatsApp while we've actually been on this call right now. We've actually just got, and you will know which one I'm talking about, the green light, sorry, not the red light, the green light for a consulting for equity deal that I went to last week. So this particular one was a conversation that was had a couple of weeks ago. Somebody that knew me, is not in acquisition masters, but nevertheless is aware of my, background and we've our paths have crossed the past, rang up with a serious business issue. Putting it bluntly, they'd acquired a business and they'd run out of cash. And, ultimately the business had gone down quickly, very quickly down after they bought it. Now, I can tell you now that having looked at those numbers, I could see that in actual fact, it wasn't just because they acquired it and they didn't know what they were doing. On the contrary, it was actually already in decline when they actually bought it. But there's some key elements that, listen, experience tells, right? And there was some signs there. However, they had an immediate situation where they didn't know where to go, what to turn, and everything else. That particular situation there led to, and it was meant to be a quick, I got to reach out. I thought it was going to be a 5-10 minute conversation. It was a hour and 20-minute conversation, which we did a bit of a dive into, the critical thing that was there. And I gave 3 pointers to that business owner in which what they should be doing in order to immediately change their situation. Following that, they asked if they could have another conversation. I said, well, because listen, they're a decent human being, a decent person. I knew the person concerned. I actually knew their business partner as well. That business partner actually lives in a different country and is remote from the opportunity. And I offered to go down there last week, and I actually went down there for a day to spend a day with the business last week to further support them. And we went through. I met the seller of the business as well. And met some of the key employees, and ultimately we came up with a strategy going forward. By the time I got down there, they've already got money in the bank now. And I'll give you an example as to what that was. That particular situation was they didn't take deposits. They're very high. Their products and service is at a high level, yet they didn't take any deposits. So immediately I said, well, you need to go and get 20% deposits. By just doing that one thing, they've turned up to the overdraft situation and we're maxed out, so suddenly we've got money in the bank just by doing that one thing alone. And there's other things which I won't go into that we went into, but the upshot of that opportunity was that person then at the end of the day asked, would I be prepared to get involved? And then they know that Ollie and I work together, and they recognise Ollie's skills. They know Ollie too about his marketing genius the agent's referring to, but it is. And we had a meeting with them yesterday. The other partner as well was on the phone, and we said, listen, these are the terms under which we get involved. And they've just given us, as I say, literally while we've been on this, recording this right now, they're giving us the green light to say, yeah, we'd like to move ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's because I think that's a real opportunity for people, especially if you're in your industry when you're acquiring. I mean, I haven't done a specific consult for equity, but I've done similar things to what you're talking about, Clive. Like, I always think I work a lot with sellers who are not necessarily want to exit right now, but potentially want to exit in the future, but don't know. Their viewpoint is, I don't know if I want to sell, but all I know is I want to just be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it effectively, which I actually think is a form of exit strategy. People always see exit strategies, it has to be a full sell, but I don't think that's true. I think an exit for a person is maybe you work, 20 hours a day and you only want to work 10 hours a day. And I suppose in a way you've exited. And I always think you go for a bit of a journey, because I tend to find that the biggest thing is the owners stepping in, fixing a lot of issues for staff. Often doing a lot of people go, I don't do any financial work, have an account. But when you actually get to the nitty gritty of what they do, there's a lot of paying suppliers twice. And I think there's a lot of different elements in a strategy to get someone. I mean, I say they go through 3 stages. They're owner operator, that they're involved. Then they might go to like board member. which I think is you might still be involved in key decisions, but you don't necessarily do the day-to-day. And then there'd be what I would call silent investor, which becomes a bit like a corporate setup, whether then the shareholder, they don't do anything in the day. Now, obviously, the full shareholder would be probably where it'd go to maximum value. And I think a lot of people get up to the board member, but they're a bit mixed between sort of owner, operator and board member, because they kind of have stepped out of the operation because they might have 15 employees or something like that, 20 employees. But in reality, they're piggybacking all of them employees because one, they've promoted them all into the wrong roles. Everybody's doing anything they want. And there's no control around any of their biggest risks, which I know I talked about the last one, didn't I, Clive, when we talked about like risk mitigation and sort of corporate governance and risk mitigation. So when you could do it through a consult equity or whatever, but I suppose when you're buying businesses, if the seller hasn't set any of this up, these are the problems that you then take on as the buyer. So that's why a buyer needs to understand that business or have the cash to bring people in that can do it. And that's, I think, another thing, isn't it? But, these no money down deals, which is probably a whole nother podcast, no money down deal issues that we see, because people are just being told, oh yeah, you can buy it with no money, but they're not being told about the operational constraints when they actually take it.
Yeah, and the interest, it's interesting. There's a lot they covered. I mean, in terms of consulting for equity, so we'll just go and finish that. I just want to finish that off probably with one thing, which is to say, what does consulting for equity? Consulting for equity is generally a situation. Well, this is how I operate it, which is that there is a retainer fee for you being involved in the business because you are regularly having a touch point. We only act as advisors, Ollie and myself. So we advise, we don't do the do, but we might help support. There's a lot more work initially in the project initially, but ultimately once it's all set up, we're there to ensure it's well structured. And the equity bit comes because we're sharing in the uplift that we give the business. Okay, so we have an equity stake too. Now, in terms of what you've obviously alluded there in terms of the business, a lot of businesses, you're absolutely right, they're not really transferable. And there's a lot of people, and this is the problem that most sellers are going to have when they come in, because there's an awful lot of businesses that are, first of all, already out there and available for sale. But how many of those would I actually buy? I have to say, not many, relatively. There's opportunities to come up every single day. And because I've been around the scene for a long time, I have an awful lot of connections and I get referred deals across my desk. There's even a section within Acquisition Masters called Deals Over the Desk, where we do get deals across the desk that in some cases are great deals, but the vast majority I wouldn't ever recommend because they're not deals I would do. And the main problem you come across is they've got the wrong people, as you've just alluded to, in the wrong seats. They've not got their systems, processes set up appropriately so that when they actually exit the business, they can actually, if they go out of the business, then they're instrumental. There are an awful lot of sellers out there. I will say this, and for those that are sellers, maybe considering sellers, they're going to be selling their business in the short term. If you're sitting there thinking that you're the most important person in that business and only you can do this job, then there's a problem, right? The reality is you need to get yourself out of it. And to your point, Julie, you need to be working on the business, not in the business. And if you're working in the business, then there's a problem there because you've got to transition yourself out beforehand. You'll go and get more money for your business. If you've got to do it after the event, after the sale, so there's a transitional period in which that's going to happen, then I can tell you now you're going to get less for your business. So. Sorry, yeah.
And what was it, I was going to say, so if somebody is in that scenario, guys, let's just say there's £2 million business.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe they make it a 20% margin, like EBITDA, net margin, whatever people want to call it. And reality is they think they're making a 20% margin. But if you looked at the roles they were missing in that business, it's probably a 10% margin, which means most people's profits needs to be 10% higher, probably.
Yep.
To cover additional overheads to actually get them to a real 20% margin if they wasn't working in the business. So they've obviously got to get, haven't they, from that, the 20% up to the 30%, which I've sort of been doing in my business. I mean, if someone's at that, what do you think they should do to help them start moving towards the 30, to increase it, to start getting themselves out of the business? I mean, what have you got any tips that you think people could follow?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing is to really assess. I mean, first and foremost, you need to assess the people you got within the business. So, is there any opportunity there where you can help to mentor to move on? Because it's a great opportunity, obviously, for them in order to move on. So, I mean, I would do certainly a people assessment. If you've also got a situation where, I'll be honest with you, some businesses are too fat when it comes to the number of people they employ. They get lazy, they get complacent, they just employ individuals, because there's a need, they've got a bit of extra work, so they employ somebody. But then maybe when there's the work's not around, so sometimes some have got too many people within there. Sometimes it's not down to that; it's just down to inefficiencies, processes. Assess your processes about what it is that you've actually runs through the business. So, for example, I saw an engineering manufacturing business not long ago, and actually I saw it about 18 months ago, and I've seen it again since, very recently, because I caught up with them for a coffee when I was passing, and ultimately they've got the same problems they had even back then. They have an awful lot of work in progress tied up there. They're not very efficient. And the problem, if you like, is that when it comes down to if you're inefficient, then ultimately that is going to be affecting your bottom line, and so that's the case. Always look at your suppliers. Your suppliers, everybody. I don't care who you are and how long you've been working with your suppliers. You should always be checking and making sure that they're giving you a right deal. And I've gotten a very good example of that, and I'm happy to talk about it. It was actually my first acquisition. And on the flip side, also your pricing. Is your pricing right and positioned right? Do you regularly update it? Do you actually review those pricing? Because quite a lot of companies actually are not charged the right price. Now, those same company owners will say, well, we are charging the right price because in actual fact, that's the market level. It all comes to pricing, as we all know in life, comes down to value proposition and its positioning in terms of that. So one business that we work with in our digital the business we work with in our digital marketing company, Ollie, what was the prices they used to charge typically when we first started kicking or working with audiologists?
In terms of us or in terms of them?
In terms of them.
Yeah, they were kind of at the, I'd say about $5,000 mark was their ceiling of what they charge for their services.
And where are they now?
Our highest is at 10.
Right, now I'm going to give you the reason for why that was the case. So in a case, and I'm going to give you this as a real example again, because we always talk about real examples in Acquisition Masters, because that's what resonates with people. It's so good for bouncing something off the wall. So in the case of our audiologists and their private pay hearing aid clinics, predominantly in the US, although we now have just, we are also feature in Canada and also now in the UK. But the reality is that most of those audiologists were focusing on, they provided the widget, the hearing aid. What they didn't settle down and give enough focus on was actually the service that they provide. So taking somebody and properly, their education, going through all their medical qualifications, and actually being able to provide them with making sure that the hearing aid was the right one, and also was optimized in order to make sure they get the most out of their hearing devices. Good audiology is far more important than the actual widget. And we've now positioned those, and all of a sudden, they've, as Ollie's just alluded to, when we started out in this profession, they were typically charging $4,500 to $5,000 for their services to a client that might be with them for 3, 4, sometimes even longer, 5 years, right? Now they're charging, as Ollie's alluded to, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for exactly the same thing. But the difference is that they are selling it on the service, because what they were doing is they were fighting to get to the bottom of the tank rather than the top. And if you are for businesses that you can't be, unless you're a very large organization or you're doing something a little bit naughty and not paying your taxes, as some, in certain sectors there are those, they do, there's certain businesses that fight against things like that. Then ultimately you can't be you can't be at the bottom of the tree in terms of pricing. You definitely don't want to be in the middle either. You want to be, in my opinion, at the premium end. And the premium end pricing comes about from knowing your value. And so we've got a situation where we might get involved with the business. In fact, I can tell you now, we are involved with the business where they are. When I went in there, I said, where do you rate on a scale of 1 to 10 what your service provision is? They said, we're a 10. We are far better than anybody out there. This is the reason. Everybody says that. I said, though, but they justified it. And actually, they convinced me they were a 10. I said, right, where are you on the pricing scale? 7.
Yeah. So there wasn't those.
I'm not going to say anything there, but there's a disconnect there, right? So what I'm going to say to you there is that there is, it's a matter of having understanding your value, understanding your value proposition, understanding your pricing, all of those things, understanding your costs, making sure that you're not being taken advantage of. And as I say, I can give you a story about that if we have time.
I do just have something for Ollie, because I just want to say, I see the problem is people just chasing sales. So what I did with my acquisition, because when I acquired, we took about 12 months where we sort of dropped sales to sort of streamline our processes. And I think when we did our year-on-year comparison, we were only about 20% up in sales, but we got up 200% in profit. So we had dropped all that overhead. So we hadn't, and that was because we had to accept we had a year of low margins. Because we had to acquire, we knew we'd acquired a bit of a turnaround. We knew we had to just bite the bullet, get on with it, streamline the processes. And too many people, when I speak to them about like exits and things, they say, we're not in that place. We're in the growth phase. And I'm a bit like, but where does the growth phase stop? Because isn't a business always in a growth phase? You would think a growth phase is never stopping. You might start at it. So I find it interesting when people are just like, I'm in a growth phase, because you're always in a growth phase. But the question is, are your processes and infrastructure catching up with your growth? So I'm interested to hear from Ollie about his view, because obviously with the marketing and that being your bag, what's your view on marketing and sales versus efficiency? Not just value that you get to the customer. I'm talking about internal efficiencies that help you deliver that value. What's your view?
I think Clive touched on it there in terms of where you want to sit in the market as well. Because I feel much of this stuff is stuff. I think defining where you sit in the market is super key. There's so many big Goliaths, big hairy Goliaths in the industry who, if we play pure economics, no small independent business should be a Goliath. They have access to lower costs of goods. They have management team, the recruitment team that hired the management team probably were worth more than your annual revenue. Like really, as a small independent business, your goal from a marketing perspective and everything else needs to be choose where you sit in the market and then define that and prove it to the best of your ability. So like my view on that is if you get your marketing position right, then much of the marketing is taken care of. I'm not a big believer in heavy advertising. I think the combination of get market position right and then maximize efficiency and know you're developing more money in order to build great customer experience is 90% of the battle.
And you need repeatable marketing, a repeatable flow of leads and business coming into your business. So many businesses that I speak to, when you ask them, well, how do you, what do you do for marketing? They say, well, that's the great thing about our business. We're entitled. We don't have to market because we only get repeat business and referrals and everything else. Well, that's all well and good, but if that for whatever reason, changing mood or changing, we have the COVID situation. Well, how do you go and get what do you do that's repeatable that you can actually hang your hat on, as it were, from a marketing perspective? And I think that's something that too many businesses don't actually recognize.
I think I've got loads of examples of it. So I work with quite big businesses where they've been approached by PE firms. And I've seen cases where they're pretty big, 15, 20 million.
Yeah.
And PE firms come in and go, you can't even give me a managed account. Go and sort yourself out. And then I might look to buy you, that's when the people start thinking, oh, maybe I need to get a finance team, and this is where it's a bit too late. Anyway, regardless of the team, they then come and they start getting problems with like one large customer. So I've seen where you've got 35-45% on sort of one sort of high tier customer, and basically they don't win the contract or whatever that year. So now their sales have gone from, 20 odd million probably down to 12 or something, because they've lost a big proportion. So they're kind of having a breakdown, because this is happening. And the PE firm's a bit like, I don't really care about the 8 million because you can probably build that up, but what is your contingency to build it back up? And they don't have one. And then that is what you're talking about, isn't it? Because there is no risk mitigation, there is no contingency. So you're too reliant on the handshake agreements that you've had for years with no real insight into what is my biggest risk and why and how do I mitigate it? Because why would somebody come in and pay you high multiples when overnight or within 6 months or the contract's up, you could drop 8 to 10 million in revenue and you've got no way to build that back up quickly. Obviously, you probably can because you can bring in a marketeer and stuff like that. But again, if you're not spending on that already, you're probably looking at you could be looking at a 20, 50 grand investment there to sort of get something like that off the ground. And, all that's cash, isn't it? And profit going that you haven't been doing a consistent strategy over time to build that up.
Yeah, and you're spot on. It's interesting what you say about a handshake because we're due to get involved with a project. I can't say we've actually got that. Where when we actually tried to probe on the contracts, that's exactly what you've just outlined is exactly the situation. They just got arrangements all by handshake. It's been a good agreement. There's nothing to tie that in. So if that, for all I know, they could be, it could be a situation where they like Bob because they play with Bob on the golf course and everything else. But as soon as Bob goes and does his thing, all of a sudden those relationships also go because they've really got the loyalty to Bob, right? And not necessarily to the business itself. So there's things of that nature which are, if there are any Bobs out there, you need to get those things tied up. But there's also another thing which was quite interesting, what you said about, I think you said 60% or whatever it was they lost, or you could lose those clients. There's actually one business owner that I spoke to again fairly recently. As you know, I speak to business owners all the time, and ultimately they've got a very, very sizable business, but they have two main clients, and they're two supermarkets. And the interesting about it was the very first thing that the finance company that were looking to, because this deal would require finance and a lot of it, the very first thing they said was, despite the fact they're supermarkets, so they're household names, everybody on this call probably listens to this, if they're in the UK, would definitely know the clients concerned, said, well, what if one of those takes their business elsewhere? Each of those businesses could take their business elsewhere and sink that business overnight. In there lies a problem. Client concentration is really, really important. If you're too reliant on a big client, even if it's a household name and a blue chip client, it's a red flag. And this is where people don't really recognize these things as being so. But you're absolutely right. You need to have a process in place, which can, as you say, to make it repeatable, it can take time, or it can take a lot of money, or it can take both.
And the lasting thought before we continue the podcast as well is people go, oh, I've got that, I'm selling to that, I've got good relationship. What if the person you sell to then gets acquired? Because anybody that then acquires won't buy from you because of your prior relationship, because that person doesn't care about the prior relationship. So you can't just rely on somebody else always buying off you, because what if their situation changes? And that could happen relatively quickly, and you may never know that that's going to happen. And then you find out, oh, in 2 months, he starts getting out, in 2 months they're going to sell, and then maybe you are contracted in, but it might still only be for 6 months. So,
absolutely.
But as we come to the end of the podcast, just for a second, we've talked a lot, and I think Acquisition Masters is brilliant. Obviously, I know you guys are a sponsor of the podcast, purely transparent about that, but I think it's fantastic. I've gone to the events, I see the people in there, and your guys' experience is second to none, which is why I'm aligned to the mission that you've got and the and what you're doing. So I definitely, if people are looking to go back position, we're trying to build the UK economy here, and we're trying to save these businesses that have spent 30 years and are really good for the economy going down. I don't know if anyone's seen the podcast with, Daniel Priestley, that on Diary of a CEO. Have anyone watched the recent one about, the future of the economy, and ultimately these types of things, if these businesses go under, which is what we're saying here, voluntary liquidation, or they can't sell, or they go up to the big boys who then obtain more of the market share, that we're a real risk of people just not having jobs. Because, this is a high percentage of our economy of these businesses. So, it's a really important mission to help these businesses move on, I think, to private buyers, low, not low market, but small market buyers that can truly keep these businesses running over periods of time, to keep the economy going, is my view.
You're absolutely right. And what people who are potentially sellers of the majority of businesses over the course of the next, we're really going on infinitum. The majority of the buyers are going to be primary investors, people like ourselves, and all of us. I include all of us on the call in that regard. That will look to, they'll need to look to leverage financing potentially against, obviously, the business in order to do so. But ultimately, it's not going to be any belief that there's going to be loads of trade buyers out there looking for small businesses. They don't. Family offices, they don't. They're to a higher level. PE firms, they don't look at the levels that we're talking about. Well, most businesses are going to be bought by people like us.
Yeah, so it's really important that people start to think about this strategy, because even if you don't think you're there yet, that person's going to get there relatively quickly, because time goes quick. So anyway, guys, I just want to thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
It's been really great as always. I also just want to thank the Build and Exit podcast listeners. We hit the top 200 in Apple, which is really exciting. And this is episode 51. So, if you do like the episodes, hit the subscribe button so more people can find the channel. I look forward to seeing you again soon.